It was 2.5 years ago that I actually stepped on a shell or something, cut my foot, and, put a little Band-Aid on it. I thought it'd be fine. Well, a week and a half later, I was laying in a hospital bed with a type of staph infection that turned into sepsis. There was a couple of days they weren't sure I was going to make it. Spent 2 weeks in the hospital, surgery. During that process of recovering from that, the best I could do was go for walks. And so I would call friends in Boulder and get people to come over and go for walks with me. That's where the idea of the Grand Prix started, just talking with people in the industry. People would come walk with me and I'd bounce ideas about this Grand Prix. And I always joke, Alex Howes, one of the writers that's done it the last couple of years, he's the one that came up with the idea on one of those walks for the name for the Grand Prix. And he keeps telling me he needs he deserves a royalty for it. But so that's why he still gets in. Otherwise, we wouldn't even let him in.
One day you wake up and a thing called the Lifetime Grand Prix exists. 2 years later, it's all anyone who follows pro cycling in America can talk about. How exactly did we get here and what's next? Today, we finally find out. Kimo Seymour is the Senior Vice President of Media and Events at Lifetime and the creator of the Lifetime Grand Prix. He's also an endurance sports overachiever with 11 IRONMAN finishes and 9 smoking fast times at the Leadville Trail 100 mountain bike race to his credit. Lifetime has transformed the level of competition in off-road racing. They've birthed an entirely new hybrid pro racing series that mixes disciplines in a way we've never seen before, and they've created a content and coverage flywheel that is an absolute juggernaut that is turning heads. The Grand Prix brings together an exclusive group of professional cyclists who compete in a series of legendary and soon-to-be legendary mountain bike and gravel races. In the process, they've attracted top talent from across all cycling disciplines in the United States and around the world, and they've created a vibe you simply won't find anywhere else in professional cycling. Kimo and his team have been instrumental in making it all happen, and Alex Howes plays an unexpected and crucial role. We go deep, we go kiting, we talk sepsis and epic feats of endurance in this interview. It is everything we've dreamed of and so much more. Kimo has been one of my most requested guests, and I'm excited to share this interview with you. Before I do, please take a moment to hit 5 stars wherever you listen. We're getting super close to 200 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts. So if you happen to be listening there, whether you're a longtime listener or a new one, please just take a second and help me help you. Help me bring you more awesome guests who you want to hear. You can help make it happen when you hit 5 stars. Thanks for taking a second to do that. Choose the Hard Way is the podcast about how hard things build stronger humans who have more fun. I love hearing from you. So if you want to let me know what you think of this episode or what guests you'd like me to interview next, DM me at HardwayPod or go to choosethehardway.com to sign up for our newsletter. To learn more about the Lifetime Grand Prix and Kimo, go to @Lifetime Grand Prix. Those links are in the show notes. Something I was curious about, just as I've been listening to your back catalog and I've heard a lot of material that you've covered, I think you're perhaps best known for your voice. Do you feel like you've got a voice that's just built to do this? You feel like it kind of gives you an edge?
I've been told that you don't hear your own voice the same way everybody else does. And so, the team keeps pushing me out to get on the mic and go up and fly in helicopters and commentate on events. And they like my voice, I guess. So maybe I do. Maybe I've got a radio voice.
Yeah, maybe you do. You've got the looks for TV too. We all saw you in that helicopter and thought, that guy's really a dashing figure up there in the sky. But if we were to go way, way back, what were you like as a kid?
As a kid, I think I was, I kind of grew up interesting, kind of moved all over the place as a kid and never really kind of settled in any place. I didn't go to the same school 2 years in a row till I think 5th and 6th grade. Kind of a nomadic family, and And I gravitated more towards individual sports, I think, as a kid. So I spent 5 years trying to make it on the U.S. Olympic team or the junior team, in like middle school and high school. Was a downhill ski racer. Never was very good at it, but I had high ambitions and got injured, and that was the end of that. And I started windsurfing, another super individual sport. Moved back to Kona, where my family's from, and got kind of competitive in windsurfing for a while when windsurfing was a thing, and more racing than I'd get out there in the waves and whatnot. But I was more into the racing than all the freestyle stuff and the waves. And so I did that for a while. So yeah, I grew up kind of, individual sport kid. Yeah.
So have you carried on with your passion for windsurfing? Is that transposed into foiling or kiting? Because it kind of feels like that's a trajectory over the course of a lifetime for some individuals who started at that point.
So yeah, actually really gotten into kiting here over the last 5-6 years. So took it up. When I turned 50, it was one of my bucket list items. I wanted to really learn how to do it and take it up seriously. And yeah, so my wife and I are both really into it. My boss, actually, CEO of Lifetime, he started about the same time. So it's one of the things we have fun together a few times a year. We go down and usually in the Caribbean, find some warm water and some nice winds. And so it's translated. And I think honestly, for me, I mean, it's super fun. I think the biggest thing is just the amount of gear. It's like hauling around windsurfing gear. I mean, you need a truck to ship everything, a month before you go anywhere. But kite surfing gear, you can get enough in about the size of a golf bag and take off to anywhere in the world and just take it with you. So it was probably more the gear than anything that was limiting the windsurfing. So yeah, made the transition to kiting about 5-6 years ago.
Congrats. I mean, they've been saying that cycling is the new golf in the corporate world for probably 20 years now. But when kids ask me, how can I get ahead in the world? How can I get an edge? I say, start kiting.
It's talk about doing the hard things. It's choosing the hard way. It's challenging, but it's challenging for that. It really, I try to convince people it's 3 or 4 days of getting just dragged around, pounded into the water. Like you're going to end up with a lot of water up your nose. It's tough, but if you choose that hard way, the rewards are great. Once you get it, it is just it's a really physically a pretty easy sport. Once you get the hang of kind of flying that kite and steering that board. So it's one of those, it's a hard one to learn, but a week into it, you'll be glad you did.
So your path to endurance sports, you mentioned, started with getting injured while you were pursuing downhill skiing, which, that actually seems to be a pretty common path for people to get into the sport. I know that's how Greg LeMond got into it. For example, once you got into endurance sports, like what did you love about them? What did they bring to you?
I think it was, again, growing up as kind of a, individual sport kind of kid, I didn't really have a big passion for endurance until I got into my 20s. And I just started going out doing, I started riding a mountain bike a little bit here and there with a buddy of mine from college, and he actually still ride with him a lot, and he does a lot of our events. He's a badass guy named Dean Schreiner, who a lot of people may know that guy in his late 50s, winning everything he can. But we started mountain biking a little bit, and then but didn't do any events or anything. And then someone told me about this thing back then it was called the Triple Rim Race in the Grand Canyon. And I used to hike Camelback Mountain here in Phoenix. And next thing you know, instead of hiking it once, it was, well, let's do it twice. And then pretty soon it was, well, let's go over and back 3 times. And then let's do it 4. Let's try for 5 times over and back, up and down both sides of Camelback Mountain. And next thing I know, I was in my mid-20s, went up and did they kind of got rid of it. It wasn't a sanctioned event anymore. So just kind of this underground, bunch of people show up at, I think, 4 a.m. on a certain day in May and run across the Grand Canyon and back 44 miles. And I don't know how many feet of vertical, but it was the first really hard thing I think I did as an endurance athlete. And just kind of sparked it, just doing something, just being out there, being in the elements, doing something super epic, and just head down and focused and grinding through. It's just, if you've got the mentality for it, you can kind of grind through anything,
What was that experience like?
I mean, it's pretty humbling. I will admit the last mile I got down on my hands and knees and crawled some periods of time coming out of there, leaving at 4 a.m. and coming back. I don't know, I think it was like 12 hours later, at that time of year, it was already starting to get dark by the time we came back, and I remember getting down literally on my hands and knees and crawling at times, like, I don't think I'm going to make it out of here. And the last mile, you could see the top of the rim, and so it's pretty humbling, but man, how satisfying to do that with a group of friends.
And I know that before Lifetime, you operated your own events company. How'd you get into doing that?
To be honest, I bought the company. I was the first half of my career I spent really developing real estate. I had some opportunities to get involved with a few different projects here in Arizona, and it grew into I'd say a little modest real estate development company that I owned and operated with a few people. And but kind of prior to the 2007 or 2008 crash, kind of started selling off projects and just felt like the market was too much of a frenzy. And so dumb luck timing kind of sold most of what we owned at the time, and had an opportunity to start investing in some things in the endurance space, just more for fun and to give us something to do. And that's how we got into the space. So bought a little company, ran it for 3 years, and ended up selling it to Lifetime 3 years later. And I had a 2-year earn out, a 2-year non-compete. So I thought, well, I'll stick around for 2 years and a day, and then I'll go back to being an entrepreneur. And that was 12 years ago. Here we are.
When you initially acquired the events company, was your intention to have some kind of exit rapidly, or did you, was it just like a passion thing for you at that point?
It was purely a passion thing. And honestly, so at the time I had one guy that was a good friend of mine that had worked for me in the development company. And I was, we were trying to figure out a way to make a living or have him put something together for him to make a living. A guy named Mike Melly, and he still works for me today. He's our head of operations. All of our race directors report up to Mike Melly. And so part of it was something for Mike Melly to do. And then part of it was there's a famous triathlete, I think he's the last guy to win Kona, last American to win Kona, named Tim DeBoom, was a good friend of mine, and he was kind of on the tail end of his career. And so I thought, you know what, let's buy this thing. We all partnered on it, the three of us, and it was kind of a exit path for Tim to kind of do something different, as he was transitioning out of racing, and Mike Melly to. That guy's a chameleon, and he went from being, from developing, subdivision projects to being a race director, and he did it overnight, and he figured it out, So Melly is still, I still rely on him to this day. He's the backbone of our business and behind the scenes guy, phenomenal work ethic like no one you've ever seen before. He's the one that makes the magic happen out at our events still.
The events business is a complex one. There often are a lot of factors beyond your control, such as weather. And, once you got into the events business, did you have to learn anything new or different? Did anything surprising happen, or did it kind of go the way you expected it to?
Honestly, I'm a finance guy at heart, and kind of focus on that as part of my job on a daily basis. And I learned real quickly that the events business is a cash flow management challenge. You open registration for events 9 months in advance or a year in advance. In a lot of cases, you take in, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you got to figure out how to survive on that and have enough money left at the end to produce the event next year. And so that was a shocking reality when we got into the business, is just cash flow management of it.
Right.
And then, the other, back in those days, the other challenge was differentiation. And that's still a challenge to this day, is how do you differentiate the experience at your event? Because there's a lot of competition out there, and you can see it today, in the gravel world. It has gotten so diluted. And you pick a weekend, you could probably find 10 gravel races around the country any weekend, And so we constantly have to strive. We did back then, and we have to today strive to differentiate our events through the experience.
So do you think about that differentiated experience as the moat for the business at this point?
I think it needs to be. Yeah, I think we can never get complacent. Doing things like the Lifetime Grand Prix. I've said this before. It's a means of differentiating. There's a lot of different reasons that we started the Grand Prix, but one of them, from being honest, one of them is to differentiate our events and draw more attention to our events. And that because there is so much competition out there, and there are so many good events out there. And part of the beauty of gravel is they are so, everybody's experience is just, every event out there has just, I shouldn't say every event has a great experience. There are a lot of events that have great experiences, and people do a fantastic job. And we just need to, we need to continue to differentiate ours. And, in the case of the Grand Prix, our thought was bring more, give an opportunity for elite athletes, try to get more media attention, more exposure, bring more fans to the sport, hopefully more eyeballs watching the sport. And then through that, hopefully, more sponsor dollars will show up. And again, I've said this in the past as well. I mean, some of those sponsor dollars are going to come to the events. Some of the sponsor dollars are going to go to the athletes, and there's a healthy balance there. And that's a good thing for the industry in our minds.
And for people who are going out and doing these Lifetime events today, or who are consuming the Lifetime series on YouTube, how far back did the vision for what we're seeing right now start? Was this 5 years ago, 7 years ago? When was the initial idea to bring it together in this fashion?
It started about 2.5 years ago. So it started about 6 months before we announced the first year of the Grand Prix. So I think that was in the spring of 21. And, I was thinking, after listening to some of your other episodes, some of your other guests, I was thinking about, it's interesting how some of the challenging times, that we go through bring out some of our best creativity. And it was 2.5 years ago that I actually, back to kiteboarding, I was actually down in Turks and Caicos with my wife, and I think I stepped off the board and stepped on a shell or something, cut my foot, and, put a little Band-Aid on it. I thought it'd be fine. Well, a week and a half later, I was laying in a hospital bed with an infection that had come, a type of staph infection that turned into sepsis. Almost didn't make it. There was a couple of days they weren't sure I was going to make it. Spent 2 weeks in the hospital, surgery, a bunch of things. And so during that process of recovering from that, the best I could do was go for walks. And so I would call friends in Boulder and get people to come over and go for walks with me. And it was for that's where the idea of the Grand Prix started, just talking with people in the industry, they're professional riders in Boulder, industry, people that are in the industry. And it was in that, that kind of tough time in my life. And the best I could do was get up and go for a walk, and people would come walk with me, and I'd bounce ideas about this Grand Prix. And I always joke, Alex Howe is one of the riders that's done it the last couple of years. He's the one that came up with the idea on one of those walks, coffee talks, came up with the idea for the name for the Grand Prix. And he keeps telling me he deserves a royalty for it. But that's why he still gets in. Otherwise, we wouldn't even let him in.
That's pretty amazing. Okay, so I have a couple of questions about that. I've heard you talk before about these now legendary walks. I have to imagine that one day when they have the Lifetime Grand Prix Hall of Fame, there'll be some kind of interactive exhibit, like Take a Walk with Kimo, right? They'll have an AI where they can kind of like relive these walks and conversations. But following the injury, the sepsis, you've been a highly active person your entire life. I don't know if you've ever had other periods of time when you had to really dial back your activity, but what did it feel like to go through that experience? And did it reframe anything for you in terms of what you valued or what you felt was important to do with your time?
It did actually. It reframed. I think I came out of that with a lot less focus and a lot less just personal influence on on performance. It just, performance became a lot less important to me. I had done, I'd done 13 Leadvilles in a row up until just prior to the pandemic, and then 2020 we had to cancel. 2021 I would have been back there, right back at the start line, and it changed. It gave me a little bit different perspective on a lot of the things, at least that I do. You know, from a physical standpoint, and it's really changed the focus for me personally to focus more on experiences. And I've had more fun the last couple of years going out and still going out and doing crazy long rides with friends. And, but they're much more about the adventure and the experience than they are about, training for Leadville or Unbound or some race that we might, that I maybe have ambitions to do that year. So it just changed that's how it changed my perspective. It much more about going out and having fun and enjoying the moment than being so head down focused. And, I'm an idiot. I'm 50, I'm in my early 50s, and I'm like, who gives a shit how fast I go at an event? It's like, you used to have all that kind of focus and energy around trying to be competitive and, be at the front of the pack and do well at Leadville or whatever. And it's like, man, just missing it, I was missing the fun that you could be having out there, So I have a lot more fun now out, with still, stay in fairly decent shape, but being competitive is a lot less important.
When you think about what the specific ingredients might be in your personal recipe for like a good time, because let's get real. I bet we're still talking about something that's quite physically challenging, whether that's distance, degree of difficulty, whatever the case may be. But what is it for you that makes an experience transformative or becomes this catalyst for your friendships or whatever it is? Is it the mix of people? Is it where you go? Like, how do you think about it?
It's probably those two things. It's the, hanging out in Boulder and getting the right group together for a fun, for an epic long day, and then going out and, say, hey guys, let's go out and try to get 10,000 feet today. Or, let's try to, however many miles we want to try and do, or check out some new, there's just endless. If you spend any time in Boulder, there's endless amounts of gravel and dirt, single track. You can piece together just epic days out there, and then sprinkling in a stop at the Gold Hill store for cookies and coffee or something, So I think to me, it's almost always starts with the group of people now. And I think we've kind of gotten known with our group of friends, like we're the ones that pull together that ride every Saturday morning and come up with a kick-ass route and a great group of people, and off we go.
And Kimo, when you take a look at your customer base, people who are participating in these events, I first did, what's today known as the Unbound 100. I first did in 2013. I've been racing bikes since the late 80s off and on. But as far as gravel goes, I started probably like around 2013. I don't know, like about a month ago, I was in Kansas to do the BWR Kansas, great experience for the reasons that you just shared. I was there with actually a bunch of former podcast guests, my friend Spencer, who I host Beyond the Peloton pro cycling podcast together, some other friends I hadn't seen in a long time. One of the things that struck me during the race was, number one, most of the people are roughly middle age that are out there generally. And just from listening to people in my group, it kind of struck me how many people had had a cardiac ablation, because that just kind of like popped up at different points during the race. And I actually had a little spell of AFib, which I've dealt with a bit in the past during the event. But I just kept thinking about these events have become really popular, and they take a lot of time, money, and resources generally to go do. How are we getting new people into the funnel, like top of the funnel, to give this some legs over, the next decade, 20 years? And we've seen a boom with NICA, the High School Mountain Bike League. There are a lot of young people riding off-road. So far, I haven't seen a lot of young people at gravel events, but you're much better positioned than I am with this relatively small sample set. So, like, what are you seeing?
Well, I will tell you that I think the growth of gravel, I like to think that part of the growth of gravel is that it has made cycling much safer than it is on the road. I know, I just countless people I talk to that come and do our events that never would have gotten on a bike and gone out and ridden on the road. But gravel has kind of created that opportunity for people. Mountain biking, I think there is all, mountain biker at heart myself, but I think there's
Right.
a stigma to it that is it's a higher barrier to entry because the perception of it being very technical, very, you're going to crash, you can get hurt, blah, blah, it's those sorts of things where I feel like gravel is just such an easy entry point that it's naturally just opened up the funnel. That it, from, again, much bigger funnel, I think, than road or mountain. And so I think that's why we've seen the growth here. I think, the up and coming and the youth, I've had long conversations with people about, I've been on the board of NICA for 3 years, passionate about what NICA's been doing. They're doing a phenomenal job of bringing kids into the sport. But the challenge is what happens the day they step away from NICA and they go off to college. And I've been pretty vocal in saying that I feel that's where USA Cycling should focus. I think collegiate and then naturally the Olympic development, but I think collegiate development is where they should be the most focused. And I think, the recent hire of Nat Ross down in Bentonville to really kind of lead that effort for them, it shows that they're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're buying into that. And I think they're going to do a phenomenal job of helping to, let's say, bridge that gap between high school graduation and 26 or 27 years old, when you can afford to get a bike and go out and start riding again. You've kind of out of college on your career path and people start riding again. So hopefully hopefully what USA Cycling is doing, especially around collegiate development, really starts to feed the funnel as well. And then obviously, again, just the ease of access. There's so much gravel across this country. I mean, you can't, I read a stat somewhere that more than 50% of the roads in this country are not paved, so there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I think, I had this coming Sunday, it'll be 9 years ago, my best friend was hit and killed on the road. And I was, riding with him the day before, the exact same road. And that just it changed my perspective a little bit. And I think that's when I just, consciously started thinking to how to steer our events business and start to move and focus more on off-road, and just giving people the opportunity to kind of enter the sport, but more, off-road, staying away from road cycling.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your friend. And unfortunately, most of us have a story like that who've been riding bikes on the road for any period of time. It's really sad that road cycling, it's almost like base jumping now. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend to almost anyone who wants to get into the sport to go out and road ride. It'd be like telling someone to start wrestling lions or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I down here in Phoenix, we do ride on the road a lot because that's really the only, really some of the only options. We choose to ride in pretty big groups, and like to believe there's safety in numbers, but I think it's kind of playing roulette, and so I've just never wanted to. We get asked all the time, what can you do something to help save road cycling in North America? You guys are all focused on off-road. You're doing some good stuff there, but nobody's focused on the road. And I don't know how to solve that problem. And just kind of morally, I don't know that I want to. It's never been a passion to try and encourage more people to road ride or road race. If somebody else can figure out that model, great, but that's probably not going to be our area of focus.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely hard to monetize. And, I guess I'm a bit of an outlaw. I end up riding by myself on the road pretty frequently with lights front and rear, but it's not necessarily something I would recommend to other people who are starting to get into the sport, unfortunately. So with where you're at with the Grand Prix right now, as someone who's, I was an executive at Strava, and I'm an entrepreneur now, starting up a tech company with another former Strava executive. And when I take a look at what's happened in the last 2.5 years with the Grand Prix, maybe I'm imposing a model on it that wasn't there at the outset, but I just see this brilliant virtuous cycle you've created where you have the athletes have to compete to get into the Grand Prix. So there's scarcity. It provides high status to them. They bring with them most of them with substantial social media following. Most of them also create pretty awesome content that's advertising your events. And in the last 2.5 years, I personally have become much more aware of events other than Leadville and Unbound that I hadn't necessarily heard much about before. So it seems like you've really elevated the status of those events. So in turn, they're highly desirable to amateurs. And now something like Big Sugar, which I don't know how long that's been going on, but I feel like it only came into my sphere of consciousness in the last 2 years. And now me and all my friends are like, we got to go to Big Sugar last year. So I feel like what you're doing is working. What's your point of view on, like, what was the model at that outset? Was that how you thought about it?
We did. I think the initial idea was, I was frustrated watching what was happening to pro cycling, again, number of friends in Boulder, and just seeing with the demise of road racing, there really was nothing. There wasn't a way for pros to make a living. And I thought, gosh, if we could create something, draw a little bit of attention to it, that, the more media exposure, the more hype, the more, media impressions around the events would be good for the pros. And hopefully they could bring in more sponsor dollars to support them. Certainly we looked at it as, okay, let's throw in we obviously we have some events that sell out instantly. They sell out the lottery, Unbound, Leadville particularly. So driving demand for those events wasn't really, part of the initial framework, but driving demand for some of the other events was. And so we kind of cherry picked and said, because we've got, I think, 13 or 14 off-road events each year, we cherry picked and said, what are the ones we think, trying to fit them into a window. I thought, we had acquired Sea Otter, and I thought, what a great way to kick off the year. Biggest cycling festival, biggest cycling event probably in North America. Great way to kick it off. Big Sugar, to answer your question, this year was the third year for Big Sugar. But the interesting thing, the way we had launched that event originally, it sold out in about 2 minutes the first year we launched it. So we always had good demand there, but I just felt like, great way to, 6 months, start in April, end in October. That feels good. Have Leadville and Unbound kind of be a staple, but then we could kind of bounce around between some other events to drive a little bit of demand for some of the other events. And so it seems like it's worked, so it seems like we've been able to elevate the status of some of those other events. I think it's also elevated the status of events like Unbound and Leadville. We get a lot more international applications for the lottery now, and domestic. We just get a lot more applications for the lottery at both of those events, but internationally, a lot more people trying to get in. And then, it's created an opportunity. I do hear from a lot of the pros that it makes a difference if they, when they're talking to sponsors, if they can say that they are in the Grand Prix. And that's why we moved the application window up this year, because some of the feedback we got, and it was that, riders needed a little bit more time, it would be nice to know a little earlier in the process of negotiating sponsorships. It wasn't a convenient time for us to be doing the selection process, but we moved it up almost a month, or a little over a month, just to help out the athletes, that especially some of the international athletes that are trying to secure enough funding to be able to travel over here for, either travel back and forth or come live over here for 6 months.
What was your hypothesis around the size of the cohort in the Grand Prix initially? And then why did you reduce the size?
So we started with 30 the first year. And to be honest, we debated, at one point we thought we would start with 20, 25, 30. We went round and round. And what really drove that was I was concerned about taking just too many entries away from all the people that enter the lottery and want to get into these events, and particularly Unbound and Leadville. And I said, it seems unfair to just carve out 60 or 70 slots, or too many, or, if we went higher, it was discussion about, well, gosh, just let every pro in that wants to do the series. Well, the problem is we're taking slots. That's just automatic entries for when everybody else is fighting to get in. They're going to qualifying events. They're hitting the lottery every year, and then people might go 5 years in the lottery and not get in. And so I just felt like, yes, we want to give an opportunity for the pros, but it felt unfair to everybody else to just take that many entries away, that many slots away. So that's why we That's why we ultimately decided to limit it. I wish I could tell you we were smart enough to say that, yeah, if we limit it to 20 or 30, it'll create a whole lot more excitement, enthusiasm around those athletes. That's just kind of happened naturally. Our thought was limit those numbers because we wanted to limit the number of slots we were taking away from all the age group riders.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk on other podcasts kind of broadly about what you're doing with the storytelling with the YouTube series. I mean, now you've got the helicopter. We've got to talk about that. Are we going to see the helicopter at future events? But do you want the bulk of the storytelling? Like, do you like having it be kind of crowdsourced to the athletes themselves and their sponsors? Or do you want to be driving that more because, high tension narratives and having the athletes actually be characters, that's what really animates any sport, of course.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the fact that kind of crowdsourced content is, to me, that stuff is it's organic. It's just feels natural. It feels more authentic. The stuff that we do, obviously, it's highly produced. We're spending a lot of money on it. We definitely, we wanted to. Everybody's trying to, every sport out there, I think, is trying to mimic what they do with Drive to Survive. And I'd be lying if I didn't say we didn't, we're not all paying attention there as well, but we're trying to figure out how to make it, a little unique and different. And it needed to be, it needs to be more kind of authentic to our sport, and so the way we've done it, to be honest, we don't know what we're doing. We're just trying things. We have a great team. We have some ideas. And more than anything, I think we're super fortunate to have a company like Lifetime behind us because, to like Lifetime, the joke with our CEO is that, this is a rounding error to the company. And that's a good thing in a lot of ways, right? That we can get away with, or I say get away with, but we can plan for and go try some things like this, and we can afford to do it, And so the Grand Prix is, it's costing Lifetime a pretty good chunk of money. I mean, it's a net financial loss for us, but we feel like it's doing good for the industry, doing good for the athletes. It's doing good for our events as well. But net, it's a financial loss for us.
What do you want to be doing with the series or with the storytelling around it that we haven't seen yet? I don't know if you could share that with us, but like, what have you got up your sleeve, or what have you wanted to experiment with that we haven't seen yet?
Well, we actually already experimented with it in 21. We partnered with Flow Bikes, or sorry, 20. Well, we did it 21 at Unbound. We did one event live with Flow. Last year, we were planning to do all 7 events live, and we just really quickly figured out, we quickly learned how hard that is to do on these, big, wide open, remote courses, where there's almost zero cell coverage for, vast, swaths of these courses. Makes it really challenging when you don't have connectivity. The other thing that we learned is that it's kind of boring, like to watch 200 miles of, if you had a camera sitting on the front of the race for 200 miles, you have these little moments of excitement, but it's not the most exciting. 10 hours of coverage of Unbound probably wasn't going to be engaging, for the fans and trying to bring more fans back to the sport of cycling. So this year, getting around to answering your question about where we're going, based on what we've learned this year, and the idea with bringing out the helicopter at Leadville, it wasn't even a plan to do commentary. It was to get up and go test. The original plan was we wanted to start testing some technology and look at how we might be able to do better coverage of the race if we ever decided to do segments, or let's say the last 2 to 3 hours of the race live, and get to that point. And so we've still got a lot to learn, and we're still, every event. I think if you looked at what we did for Leadville and then looked at what we did for Big Sugar, we think it got exponentially better, but we still have a long way to go. And so I think it's going to continue to be a constant evolution till we figure out what the right recipe is. Where we're headed right now, I think the concept is if we can get to a point of live streaming a portion of the race, it's likely the last, depending on the length of the race, the live is probably the last hour to 2 hours. And we do, let's say the first hour of a broadcast would be, kind of a roll up of what's happened up to that point in the day, so be out capturing what's happening, edit it down, kind of capture the essence of what happened, take Unbound, capture the first 6-7 hours, roll it up into a half an hour, 45 minutes, and then go live. So tell the story from start to end, but really just the last hour to, couple hours would be live. So that's in a dream state where we're going to be, but it's a pretty massive investment. I mean, if you know how live streaming works, I mean, the connectivity is a big chunk of it. I think capturing it is probably the easier part. It's the connectivity that we're having to work through for some of these really remote courses.
Who do you see as the audience for that content?
That's a great question. We the first couple years with this series, you've probably heard me say this before, or our team has said, we want to create more fans of the sport of cycling. And, this over the last few months, we've started to recognize that, there aren't that many fans of cycling in North America. And to be honest, I don't know how we're going to, if we can create exponentially more, there needs to be exponentially more fans, not nominally more fans, exponentially more fans. And what we're starting to realize is we need to take what we're doing to where the fans already are, right? Australia, South Africa, and Europe. I mean, the fan base around cycling is exponentially larger. And our thought is that we need to take it to the fans, not only try to create more fans here in the US, which is kind of where we first started. We first thought, gosh, if we can get more people from the US watching what we're doing, then we know we're winning. The reality is it's so small here in the grand scheme of things, but you look at how look at the audience in Europe as an example, and there seems to be an appetite for it. We just, because the interest is so high over there with what we're doing over here in the US around off-road racing.
Yeah. And Kimo, you've been around endurance sports for a minute. So when you look back at, if we're just to look at cycles within cycling specifically, we had the Norba boom with pro cross country mountain bike racing in the late 80s, early 90s. Then we had road racing took off with the whole Lance era. Then we had 24-hour mountain bike racing got really hot from a participant point of view. Then we had Grand Fondos, and then gravel kind of started to kick off. And in the middle, you had like the whole fixed gear alley cat type of riding, like the whole fixed gear culture kind of boomed. How do you see gravel having like a level of sustained success? Is it just the people want to get away from cars aspect of it, or do you feel like we're going to see a really high level of sustained interest and participation for decades versus, oh, this is just like another cycle that we see and it's going to die out at some point?
We have invested so heavily in it because we do think that there is long-term sustainability around off-road. I think, as I said earlier, mountain biking is not quite as inviting or welcoming just because of it's challenging and it's intimidating for a lot of people. It's not an easy entry point. It's off-road, but there is still a stigma around mountain biking. To people that don't mountain bike, they think of it as being this extreme sport, right? They see what people are doing at the Red Bull events in southern Utah going off of cliffs, and they think that's mountain biking, but gravel riding, our outlook is that it is, because it is it's a welcoming environment. It is, it's a fairly low barrier to entry sport. Anybody can do it, right? If you can ride a bike, you can go out and ride on gravel and probably feel fairly safe, so we think there's some long-term sustainability. Now, I think the natural evolution of any kind of, we'll call it a new, if you consider gravel a new, segment of an industry, I think naturally what's happened is while it's low barrier to entry to the athletes, it's also a very low barrier to entry business model for promoters. And I think, if you can find some town in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, and go out there, they'll probably welcome you with open arms to bring a few hundred or thousand people to their town for the weekend. And you've probably got as many miles of gravel road as you could ever want for an event. And so I think that's why we've seen such a proliferation of events. And I think naturally what happens within any industry, when you see kind of mass proliferation, eventually you see consolidation. And I think we're already starting to maybe see that a little bit. It feels like the pace of growth of new events is starting to slow a little bit. And we're also starting to see a little bit of consolidation, just some events kind of, shutting their doors. Some of the smaller ones finding that, it's tough to make money on 100 or 200 or 300 people. It's a lot of work. In many cases, it's, if you get 250 people for a race, it's just as much work as if you get 2,500 people for a race. So if you have bigger aid stations, so I think people are finding out pretty quickly that it's tough, at those small numbers, and we'll probably see a little bit of consolidation here over the next couple of years.
When you think about experience design for lifetime events and what makes for a great event, there has been a great deal of discourse this year about the courses at lifetime events. We're not going to relitigate Mudgate again here. And my mom always asks me to, because thanks for listening, Mom. My mom listens to the podcast and she constantly tells me, hey, sometimes you bring up some real inside baseball type things. I have no idea what you're talking about. I think most gravel fans know I'm referring to the long stretch of mud at Unbound 2023. When I last did the Unbound 100 in 2015, we had a similar scenario where, 15 miles into the race, we ran for an hour, which I've talked about on the podcast in the past. And I just had Joe DeSena on, as you know, you listen to the episode. And Joe and I talked about this concept of kind of fixed challenges versus a challenge where someone else is turning the dial and you don't know what's going to happen. That's what happens with something like the weather turns a portion of the course into mud. But if we were to look at an event like Big Sugar, it sounds like, from talking to a lot of different pros, like it's a pretty gnarly course. So at a certain point, does it become a question of the gnarliness is what people are there for and what they find to be attractive versus this is becoming a mountain bike race? Or how do you think of that mix of level of difficulty and variability?
It's funny. I think one of the other criticisms we get is that you do the same course year in and year out, and it's just eventually people get bored with the course, right? And so the founders of Unbound made the decision to change the course they change the course every year a little bit, and then they also change it from north to south, as you know. So we'll be going back north here for the next couple of years. Big Sugar, gnarly course. Like that one can be, I think, subjective. There are, some people get done and say, oh, that's just amazing. It's fantastic. And other people get done and say, oh, that's really chunky. It's tough gravel. And so, I think that gnarly is very subjective. And I think honestly, like we see Big Sugar, you'll see the course change year to year. It just, they get a lot of rain, or it's depending on kind of the weather beforehand, it could be a completely different course, each year. I will say one of the things I think we are good at is listening to our athletes and taking suggestions. Now I wish we could take everybody's suggestion that we get, but that would drive us crazy. But I was sitting talking with Russell Finsterwald after Big Sugar, and he came up with the idea, and he said, because we had announced that we're going to use the same 7 events next year in the Grand Prix, and he said, have you ever thought about making some little changes just to change up the dynamic of the racing for everybody, not just the front end, but just change the dynamic a little bit. So as an example, Big Sugar this next year, we're looking at adding in some single track that's, very rideable on a gravel bike, but that will create probably some pinch points and change the dynamic a little bit that will really make the racing it could be a whole different story with just a couple minor changes. So, you heard my comments, I'm sure, after Unbound saying, I don't think we're ever going to go back or go make changes to a course just to make it easier for people. These are supposed to be epically hard challenges. They are. I tell you, people go away much more proud of what they've accomplished when it's a hard effort than when it's an easy effort, right? And that's not to say we go out and look for ways to make it exponentially harder, but we certainly aren't looking for ways to make it easier just because someone whines about something, you know? And so, I think there are ways that we could probably change some of our courses that will make it more interesting, not necessarily harder, but change up the dynamic. Like Finstead, throw in a couple cool single track sections. Our good friend Andy Chastain puts on a race down there in Bentonville called the Rule of Three. And it is road, single track, and gravel. And it's just like, that's my number one bucket list event. And I'm hoping to be able to go do it this next year. And to me, that's if we can start to add some things that change the dynamic of the race. Now that to me is an improvement. Not saying we want to go make it harder, just saying we want to change the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah. As someone who's a fan of the sport and a fan of what you're doing, I think that part of what's been interesting the last couple of years, and I do think it shifted a little bit this year, was athletes, they hadn't solved that equation of how do you approach actually racing one of these events, because they hadn't done it enough with the caliber of athletes who had shown up. And it felt like this year the tactics started to get a bit more refined and dialed in. They knew how to race it in such a way that they could be more effective. And when they don't have the cheat code and they don't actually have it all figured out, it's actually way more interesting. And I don't know if this was deliberate in the selection of athletes, which I would imagine you can't get into the secret formula there. That's got to be a bit like Coca-Cola or KFC's original recipe. But I was wondering if certain athletes were not there because they had people who they were more or less teammates for. And then, there was a domestique leader type of dynamic that, is advantageous to the rider who has someone supporting them, but it makes the racing less interesting, actually, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually happy to share a little bit of behind the curtain on the athlete selection process. In the end, what we're trying to do, and it's just a group of us sitting around. Actually, I'm not actually that involved. I kind of come in at the 11th hour, and they ask my opinion on some things that I can't tell you that I know as much as my team, but they spend a lot of time just combing through results. And what the goal is that we really want to do the best we can at selecting a field that we think is going to be the most competitive field that we can put out there. We've been beat up on social media. People think it's because of how many followers do people have, and that doesn't have. We couldn't care less about how many followers people have, and despite what everybody says, it's how do we put a field together that is the most competitive field. And so, we got some really good applicants this year, and it's tough because we can't necessarily compare. We've got, especially on the international athletes, we can't compare their results at some of our events or other domestic events against athletes that we know well. And, because a lot of them are coming from Australia, Canada, South Africa, Europe. And so we're doing our best just to kind of sift through and be as objective as we can, looking at the results and trying to field really the most competitive field that we can.
And as you think about that application process and kind of the dynamic of where you've landed this year, do you feel like we're going to start seeing more people jumping over from Europe who are current active pros versus people stepping out of the world tour and kind of seeing this as their retirement?
I think we will. We had a current world tour rider that actually applied, and we had to have a conversation with him about, are you able to commit 100%? And at the 11th hour, he came back and said, hey, you know what, we should give the slot to somebody, because I can't get my team to commit that I can be at least five of the 7 events. So we've got, the attention is there. I think there's interest. I do think over time we will see more and more riders, especially internationally, wanting to come over and compete, because I just think I think it's interesting to them. I think I think if I'm an athlete, I think the business model as an athlete doing the Grand Prix is probably more fun. It's probably more, in this environment of remote work, I'll call it flexible works. Like, you got a whole lot more flexibility as an athlete here doing, racing as a privateer or on one of the teams here domestically, but doing this sort of racing versus what you do if you go, you sign up for a world tour team, because I think they tell you what time to go to bed and what time to wake up every day, and they basically dictate your schedule for you. So I think what we're doing over here will attract more people over time when they realize that just purely from a lifestyle standpoint, it's just probably a whole lot more fun. And that's some feedback that I've heard from some of the athletes that have come off the world tour and come over here. And hey, the beauty is we got some of these world tour athletes that are doing this, ex-world tour athletes that are actually competitive. Look at Lachlan and Alex in the top 10, and Alexi, they're like, hey, this beats riding on the world tour any day.
Did you watch the Gravel World Championship?
I did not. I watched some of the social coverage, but I didn't actually watch it live this year.
Do you have a point of view on it at all?
Well, easy to jump on the bandwagon of not having the coverage for the women, and and when you have it for the men, and I don't want to sound like a bandwagoner, but we've done so much to try and create equity there between the men and the women, and are going to continue to do that. And so, that's obviously the easy target. Most of my perspective on it is talking to the athletes that did it and then came straight back to come to Big Sugar, and getting their perspective. I will say that the general consensus was they did an exponentially better job this year than last year. Much more of a challenging course, much more variability in the course than last year. Last year, everybody said it was much more of more like a road ride, road race. And so I think the variability, the interesting nature of the course, the way they did the kind of the cloverleaf loops through town, coming back through the same spot, I think the athletes, so the perspective I got, the athletes really enjoyed it a lot more this year than last year.
Yeah, on its face, it's not acceptable that there was a lack of coverage of the women's race. And unfortunately, that's not really surprising given how the UCI handles a lot of things related to the broadcast of events. And that has to change. Looking at the event itself and then what's happening, with, we could say, the quote unquote world tourization of gravel racing in Europe, and then what you all are doing. Some people look at these as separate branches of the sport. I kind of see that as a false dichotomy, and I'm more of the opinion of, like, we're making a bigger pizza with more slices, and I kind of see whatever happens in Europe, like when we look at the parcours for the Tour de France this year, and I think one of the stages has 15 gravel sectors. There's this giant conversation. ASO suddenly thinks, hey, to keep our product compelling, we have to do what's happening in the United States, or it's just not going to be as interesting, because at the participant level, that's where the demand is. So I just think it's good for everyone. And I don't really buy the narrative that, gravel is going to go in this evil Euro Pro direction, and like that's going to become the dominant force. Like, I just can't really see that happening. Why can't we have both things?
Well, I think we're going to have to, because listen, we talk a lot about the Grand Prix and the elite riders, but the lifeblood of these events is the everyday riders, the age groupers that are just out there to have a fun time. As we say, like, our goal is to help people live healthier, happier lives. And that's, we're doing that for, 30,000 riders across all of our events a year. And that's going to continue to be like, that's our life, our lifeblood, right? It isn't the pros. The pros bring, the pros bring a lot to the events. And obviously we've done a lot to invest in getting the pros to our events and creating this opportunity with the Grand Prix. But the reality is, in the US, in Europe, they don't need to worry about the mass participant, right? It's all sponsor funded. There's a big enough audience that the TV rights fund, that's where ASO makes their money, right? But we don't have that luxury here. We have to rely on on the everyday participants. And so that's, until that changes, which I don't know that I'll be around long enough to see that dynamic grow here in the US. I mean, we're doing what we can to kind of chase that dynamic and try to get more media attention and more eyeballs on the sport, as I mentioned earlier. But I think we have a long way to go. So we will always, at least in my opinion, have to continue, have to focus on the experience for the age group riders.
When you think about, it sounds like you've kind of had three big phases of your career: real estate developer, you had your own events business, and now you're doing what you're doing with LifeTime, which, chapter 3 is perhaps an extension of chapter 2. Like, what is important to you in life, and how does doing what you do professionally fit into that?
I've had this, it's a great question, Andrew. Early on in my life, I started to recognize that this issue of health and wellness in at least in the U.S., like the trends that we see, the trends around obesity and all of the obesity related illnesses and whatnot. I've just always had this passion for, like, is there, like, what little bit can we do? Like, can we, we're not going to change the entire system, right? The system, I think just the whole medical system in the U.S. healthcare system is just completely broken and flawed. And it's, to me, it's just so simple and clear that we do not treat the cause of anything that ails people. We're conditioned, and our system is set to treat the symptoms, and it's just so broken. And the cause of so much is just an unhealthy lifestyle. And I just think, now you want to figure out a way to get rich and figure out how to help people change their lifestyle, and you're not, diets don't work. It's not weight loss. It's not, it's not the short-term wins. It is like, create a lifestyle for people. And I think that's what we do. I think that's, it is a healthy lifestyle, and I'm surrounded by people that live a similar lifestyle, that strive to be healthy. And, it happens to be right now riding a bike. I've spent my time doing triathlons. Surrounded by people then using triathlon as a healthy lifestyle. Running, the running community is, it's all this, but it's such a small percentage of our population, at least here in the U.S. And gosh, it's just, like I said, the system is just so broken in my mind. And so if we can do, like, I have just always thought, if we can just have some little impact on helping people kind of change their mindset. And, addiction is not a great word, but get addicted to a healthy lifestyle. Like, if you're going to have an addiction, be addicted to a healthy lifestyle, and however you define that. But God, the way people eat these days, and the lack of physical activity, and I feel like it's just dooming our country. And so I've just had a passion for it for a long, long time, to, if we can have some little impact on helping people adopt or get infected with a healthy lifestyle.
And that's an amazing thing about these events. I think about this a lot because, as someone with a family and young children, balancing really the selfishness of being an endurance athlete, with how does that fit into, being a dad, being a partner. And I've been thinking about it a lot the last couple of weeks, because BWR Kansas was my last event of the year, and this is kind of my off season. And every time I have, that block of a couple of weeks where I'm not actually training for something, I feel like I'm actually not as effective at anything that I do without having that thing that I'm training for. I'm like, wow, even when I'm, training 15 hours a week or whatever you have to do to get ready for an event, I feel like when I'm doing that, I have greater clarity, greater focus. I'm more present. I don't know. I just feel like everything is better in my life when I have that center of gravity and it's just pulling me in its direction. Or maybe that's just what I tell myself.
Well, that's similar to what I said earlier. I think, the title of this show, Choosing the Hard Way. Like, I think when you choose the hard way, and you actually, it's those hard things or those challenging times, as I said earlier, that kind of bring out the most, your most productive, creative. For me, it's, creative and kind of thoughtful, just presence versus, when I've got when I get there are times when, when you just, take that downtime, you don't have much on your calendar, not much pushing you really or anything. It is easy to get lazy, and it's easy. Your mind, when your body gets lazy, I think your mind gets lazy, and so, I agree with you 100%.
Well, Kimo, I'm hoping that I succeed in some of my lottery attempts and that I'm at one of your events next year and see you in person. So thanks for what you do, and thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Which ones are you putting in for this next year? You want to do Leadville and Unbound?
I really want to do Big Sugar. Like that's
Big Sugar. Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I think that's the target, but we'll see. Leadville, I mean, a Flatlander going to altitude, that might be a bridge too far, or maybe that's exactly the next hard thing I need to go after. We'll find out.
I think you do. Yeah. Big Sugar. The best part about Big Sugar might have been the gravel rave this year. I don't know if you saw any of that, but man, that's a party you don't want to miss. It was pretty fun.
I did. And I'm a DJ. So that was, extra exciting to me. But it looked awesome.
We'll get you up there with Alexis and Taylor next year.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Please help more people find this podcast. To do that, just hit subscribe and rate the show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and share this episode with a friend. Go to choosethehardway.com to sign up for the newsletter, and if there's someone you think would make a great guest, DM me at HardwayPod. Choose the Hard Way is a Big Truck production. Anthony Palmer at Palm Tree Podco is the producer and editor, and Emily Miles is head of digital and marketing. Hecla Projects founder Jeffrey Nebellini is the world-renowned designer behind our striking brand identity and the iconic Choose the Hard Way logo. The content for this show is created by me, Andrew Vance.